The morning my father died was strangely quiet. There were no storms, no dramatic final words, no warning that my life was about to change forever. Just silence. The phone rang at 6:17 inches the morning. I already knew why before I answered. Dad had been in the hospital for almost 3 months. Every doctor had given us the same careful explanation. There was nothing more they could do. When the nurse confirmed the news, I thanked her politely and hung up. Then I sat alone in my kitchen staring at the wall. I expected tears. They never came. Instead, I felt empty. My father and I had never been close, at least not in the way movies describe fathers and sons. He was a quiet man, reserved, disciplined, the kind of person who believed actions mattered more than words. He worked 6 days a week for most of his life. He rarely complained, rarely celebrated, rarely talked about himself. Growing up, I often wished he were different. Other fathers played baseball with their children. Other fathers told stories. Other fathers said, "I love you." Mine simply showed up every day and did what needed to be done. At the time, I mistook that for emotional distance. Only later would I understand how much he sacrificed for us. The funeral took place 3 days later. The church was packed. People I had never met traveled from neighboring towns to pay their respects. One after another, they shared stories about my father, stories about kindness, stories about generosity, stories about favors he performed without ever asking for recognition. As I listened, I realized many people knew a version of my father that I never did. After the funeral, my mother asked me to help clean the house. She wanted to stay busy. Grief, she said, felt smaller when her hands had something to do. So we spent the next week sorting through decades of memories. Old photographs, receipts, books, furniture, boxes hidden in closets. Most of it was ordinary. Then, on the 7th day, I found the letter. It was hidden inside an old oak desk in my father's study, a desk nobody had touched in years. The bottom drawer seemed unusually shallow. When I pressed against the back panel, it shifted slightly. Behind it was a small compartment. Inside rested a yellow envelope. Nothing else, just a single envelope. My name was written across the front. The handwriting was unmistakable. It belonged to my father, for Michael. Open only after I am gone. I stared at the words for a long time. My heart began to race. My father had never written letters. Never. Not birthday cards. Not notes. Not anything. Yet here was an envelope clearly intended for me. I carried it downstairs. My mother looked up immediately. "What is that?" she asked. I found it in Dad's desk. The color drained slightly from her face. For a moment she looked almost frightened. Then the expression disappeared. "Maybe you should read it alone," she said quietly. Something about her reaction unsettled me. I took the envelope to my old bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside were several pages. The first line stopped me cold. "Michael, if you are reading this, then I am gone. There is something I should have told you many years ago. Fear prevented me from speaking. Cowardice kept me silent. And now, after carrying this burden for more than 30 years, I can no longer leave this world without telling the truth." I felt a chill move through my body. The truth? What truth? I continued reading. The next paragraph changed everything. "Your life was built upon a secret involving a woman named Eleanor, a secret I have hidden from everyone, including you." I had never heard the name before. Not once. No family member had ever mentioned an Eleanor. No photographs. No stories. Nothing. Yet according to the letter, this woman had shaped my entire life. My father continued. 32 years ago, I made a decision that changed several lives forever. I believed I was protecting the people I loved. Perhaps I was. Perhaps I was only protecting myself. I still do not know. What I do know is that an innocent woman paid the price. Her name was Eleanor. And if there is one thing I ask of you after my death, it is this. Finher. The room suddenly felt smaller. Mi puls hamad in mi ears. Finher. How? Why? Was she still alive? The answers did not come immediately. Instead, the letter offered only fragments. Pieces of a story. Hints of regret. References to events that made little sense. At the bottom of the final page, my father had written an address. and beneath it one final sentence. The truth is waiting there. I folded the letter slowly. For several minutes I simply sat in silence, trying to understand what I had just read. Eventually I returned downstairs. My mother was still in the kitchen. She looked at me carefully, almost as if she already knew what was written in the letter. "Did you read it?" she asked. "Who is Eleanor?" I replied. The question froze her in place. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in my mother's eyes. And in that moment, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My father had taken his secret to the grave, but he had not taken it alone. That night, I barely slept. The letter sat on my bedside table. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same words. Finhea. My father had hidden this secret for more than 30 years. Now he was asking me to uncover it. Part of me wanted to ignore everything, to burn the letter, to pretend I had never found it. But another part of me needed answers. By sunrise, I had made my decision. I was going to follow the address. The drive took nearly 3 hours. The farther I traveled, the more isolated the roads became. Small towns gave way to empty fields. Old farmhouses appeared in the distance. It felt like I was driving backward through time. Eventually, I arrived. The address led to a small white house at the edge of town. Its paint was faded. The front porch sagged slightly. Wildflowers grew along the fence. The place looked peaceful, ordinary, not the kind of place where life-changing secrets waited. For several minutes, I sat in my car staring at the house. Then I gathered my courage and walked to the door. I knocked. No answer. I waited. Knocked again. This time I heard footsteps. Slow, careful. The door opened. An elderly woman stood before me. Her silver hair framed a tired face, but her eyes were sharp, alert, as if she spent years expecting unexpected visitors. "Can I help you?" she asked. I hesitated. Then I held up the letter. Everything changed. The moment she saw my father's handwriting, her expression froze. Her hand trembled. For several seconds, she simply stared. Then she whispered a single name, Thomas. My father. She knew him. The realization hit me immediately. "I think you knew my father," I said. The woman looked at me carefully. Then she stepped aside. "You should come in." The house smelled of old books and fresh tea. Family photographs covered every wall. I noticed one picture immediately. A young woman stood beside my father. They looked happy, closer than friends, closer than I had ever seen my father with anyone. The woman followed my gaze. "That's Eleanor," she said softly. My heart skipped a beat. For the first time, the mysterious name had a face. She was beautiful. Dark hair, bright eyes, a smile full of confidence. Nothing about the photograph suggested tragedy. Nothing suggested disappearance. Nothing suggested a secret buried for 30 years. The elderly woman introduced herself as Margaret. Eleanor was my sister. I sat down slowly. Every answer seemed to create more questions. Margaret disappeared into another room. When she returned, she carried a wooden box. The box looked ancient. Its corners were worn, its surface scratched by time. She placed it on the table. "I've been waiting years for someone to come." I stared at her. "Waiting?" She nodded. "For you." A chill ran through me. "How did you know I would come?" Margaret smiled sadly. "Because your father promised me you eventually would." She opened the box. Inside were letters, photographs, documents, and several journals tied together with ribbon. The sight was overwhelming. Decades of someone's life preserved in paper. Margaret picked up the top journal carefully. This belonged to Eleanor. I opened it. The pages were yellow with age. The handwriting was elegant. The first entries described ordinary things: work, friends, daily life. But then the tone changed. The entries became more personal, more emotional. She began writing about my father, about how they met, how they fell in love, how they dreamed of building a future together. I kept reading, hour after hour, until one particular entry stopped me cold. The date was impossible. It had been written nearly 5 years before I was born, yet my name appeared clearly on the page. Michael. I blinked. Read it again. Then again. The name was definitely there. My name, written years before my existence. A knot formed in my stomach. "That's impossible," I whispered. Margaret looked away. "No," she replied quietly. "That's the reason you're here. I looked up. The room suddenly felt smaller. The silence grew heavy. Then Margaret spoke words that changed everything. "Eleanor knew about you long before you were born." I stared at her in disbelief. "How?" Margaret folded her hands. Tears filled her eyes. "To answer that question, you must first understand what really happened the night of the fire." Margaret's words stayed in my mind. The night of the fire. Everything seemed to lead back to that single event. I looked down at Eleanor's journal. The pages felt heavier now, as if they carried more than memories, as if they carried evidence. Margaret sat across from me in silence for several moments. Then she slowly reached for a photograph lying on the table. "This was taken 3 weeks before the fire," she said. I examined the image carefully. My father and Eleanor stood beside an old brick building. Behind them was a wooden sign, Mason Textile Mill. Both were smiling. Both looked hopeful. Happy. The kind of happiness people have when they believe the future belongs to them. "What happened?" I asked. Margaret sighed. "They were planning to leave town." I looked up. "Leave?" She nodded. "Your father and Eleanor wanted to start a new life together." That surprised me. The man I knew had never spoken about dreams, never spoken about romance, never spoken about the past. Yet according to Margaret, he once planned to abandon everything for love. What stopped them? Margaret's eyes drifted toward the window. The fire. The room grew quiet. Outside, wind rustled through the trees. It felt as if even nature was listening. Margaret continued. "The mill burned down on a Friday night. According to official reports, the cause was never determined. Some believed it was faulty wiring. Others suspected arson. No one ever proved anything. The fire spread quickly. By the time firefighters arrived, the building was already collapsing. Several workers escaped. Others were trapped. Among the missing was Eleanor. The town believed she died that night. Newspapers printed her name. Memorial services were held. People mourned. Life moved on. At least that's what everyone thought." Margaret opened another journal. This one looked newer, less worn. She carefully turned several pages, then stopped. "Read this." I took the journal. The handwriting was unmistakably Eleanor's. The entry was dated only 2 days before the fire. At first, it seemed ordinary. Then I reached the final paragraph. My hands froze. "I think someone knows. I've noticed the same car following me twice this week. The same man standing near the mill. The same strange phone calls at night. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident." I read the paragraph again, then a third time. A chill ran through my body. Eleanor believed she was being watched. Someone had frightened her enough to write about it. "Did she ever tell anyone?" I asked. Margaret nodded. "She told your father." "What did he do?" "He tried to convince her to leave town immediately." The story was becoming darker with every answer. I turned another page. Another entry. Another warning. Another reference to fear. Eleanor clearly believed she was in danger. Yet she remained. Then came the final journal entry before the fire. It was short, very short. Only 3 sentences. "I found what they were hiding. Everything makes sense now. If anything happens to me, the truth is in the blue folder." I stared at the page. "Blue folder?" Margaret nodded slowly. "We never found it." A feeling of disappointment hit me. The folder sounded important, possibly the key to everything, yet it had vanished decades ago. Just like Eleanor. Just like the truth. I closed the journal. My mind struggled to process everything. A missing woman. A suspicious fire. A missing folder. And now evidence that Eleanor believed someone wanted to silence her. None of this sounded like an accident. Margaret stood and walked toward a bookshelf. From the top shelf, she retrieved an old newspaper. The front page was yellow with age. The headline immediately caught my attention. "Tragic fire claims 3 lives." Below the headline was a photograph of the burning mill. I studied the image. Something felt familiar. Then I noticed it. A figure, barely visible, standing near the edge of the photograph, watching the fire, watching the chaos, watching everything. "Who was that?" I asked. Margaret's expression changed. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "I don't know," she whispered. "But your father spent years trying to find him." I looked back at the photograph. The image was blurry, the face impossible to identify. Yet somehow I knew this stranger mattered. A lot. Because at the bottom of the newspaper, Someone had written a note in red ink. 3 words. Find this man. The handwriting belonged to my father. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. My father had never stopped investigating the fire. Not for 30 years. Not until the day he died. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Margaret sat quietly across from me while I stared at the photograph in my hands. The woman in the picture smiled as if she had not a single worry in the world. Her eyes seemed alive, full of hope, full of dreams. It was difficult to imagine that this woman had somehow disappeared from history. Yet somehow, everyone in my family had acted as if she never existed. Tell me about her, I finally said. Margaret smiled sadly. Eleanor was the bravest person I ever knew. The answer surprised me. Most people described loved ones as kind, or generous, or intelligent. But brave? That seemed different. Margaret leaned back in her chair. For the next hour, she told me stories. Stories no one else had heard in decades. Eleanor grew up in a small house not far from where we sat. She loved books, loved music, loved traveling. Even as a child, she dreamed about seeing the world. She refused to believe her future would be limited to a small town. According to Margaret, everyone loved her. Teachers, neighbors, friends. She had a way of making people feel important. Spécial. Sayin. Then one summer afternoon, she met my father. At first, they were simply friends. But friendship quickly became something more. Margaret showed me another photograph. My father looked younger than I had ever seen him. His smile was genuine, relaxed. I almost didn't recognize him. He loved her very much, Margaret said. I studied the picture. For the first time, I realized my father had lived an entire life before I existed. A life filled with dreams and heartbreaks I knew nothing about. What happened between them, I asked. Margaret hesitated. Her expression changed. The warmth disappeared. They were happy, she said quietly, until they weren't. I waited. She looked toward the window. Rain had begun falling outside. Tiny drops slid slowly down the glass. Then she continued. A few months before Eleanor disappeared, she became frightened. My stomach tightened. Frightened of what? Margaret shook her head. She never told me everything. Only that she had discovered something she wasn't supposed to know. The room suddenly felt colder. What kind of thing? I don't know. That answer frustrated me. For every question answered, 2 more appeared. Margaret stood and walked to a bookshelf. From the top shelf, she removed a worn leather journal. This belonged to Eleanor. She handed it to me carefully. The cover was faded. The pages smelled old. I opened it slowly. Most entries described ordinary moments. Family dinners, work, conversations with friends. Then I found something different. An entry written only weeks before she vanished. The handwriting looked rushed, uneven, as if she had been nervous while writing. The words sent a chill through me. I don't know who to trust anymore. Someone is hiding something. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. I read the sentence again. Then again. The fear was obvious. Eleanor genuinely believed she was in danger. I looked up at Margaret. Did my father know about this? She nodded slowly. Yes. What did he do? He begged her to leave town. That answer surprised me. He believed her? Immediately. I stared at the journal. The image of my father continued changing in my mind. The man I knew had always seemed practical, skeptical, careful. Yet he believed Eleanor without hesitation. That meant he must have seen something too. Something serious. Something frightening. Margaret opened another drawer. Inside was a bundle of letters tied together with blue ribbon. Every letter was addressed to my father. Most had never been opened. I picked up the first one. The date was 31 years old. The handwriting matched the journal. Eleanor's. My pulse quickened. Why didn't he open them? Margaret looked down. Because they arrived after everyone believed she was dead. The room became silent. I slowly untied the ribbon. For decades, these letters had waited for someone to read them. Someone to uncover the truth. And somehow, that person had become me. As I opened the first envelope, a folded piece of paper slipped onto the table. At the bottom of the page was a single sentence. A sentence that changed everything. Thomas, if you're reading this, then I survived. But they are still looking for me. My hands began to shake. I read the sentence again. And then a third time. Thomas, if you're reading this, then I survived. But they are still looking for me. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. The room around me disappeared. The only thing that existed was that single sentence. Eleanor survived. After all these years, after decades of rumors, assumptions, and unanswered questions, she had survived. I slowly looked up at Margaret. Her eyes were fixed on me. "You never told him?" I asked. Margaret shook her head. "I couldn't." "Why not?" Tears appeared in her eyes. "Because I didn't know where she was." The answer surprised me. "What do you mean?" Margaret sat down heavily. The letters arrived from different cities, different states, different addresses. She never stayed anywhere for long. I looked back at the letter. Every word felt important. Every sentence seemed to contain hidden meaning. Carefully, I continued reading. "Tulmas, if this letter reaches you, then I need you to know something. The fire was not an accident. Someone wanted certain records destroyed. Someone wanted the truth buried forever. And when I discovered what they were hiding, I became a problem." A chill ran down my spine. The fire. Again. Everything seemed connected to the fire. The missing records. The fear. The disappearance. I continued reading. For years, I believed I could outrun them. I believed distance would keep everyone safe. But I was wrong. The truth has a way of following you, and so do the people who fear it. I lowered the letter. The words sounded less like a confession and more like a warning. "What records was she talking about?" I asked. Margaret looked away. "I don't know. You must know something." She hesitated, then nodded. "There were rumors." "What kind of rumors?" She folded her hands together. "The mill wasn't only a mill." I frowned. "What does that mean?" Margaret took a deep breath. "People said certain documents were stored there." "What documents?" She shook her head. No one knew for sure. But after the fire, many records disappeared. Birth certificates, property records, financial documents. Entire files vanished overnight. The more she spoke, the stranger the story became. I looked down at the stack of letters. There were at least 20 of them, each one sent from a different location, each one carrying another piece of the mystery. I opened the second letter. This one had been written several years later. The handwriting was weaker, more cautious. "Tolmas, I saw someone watching the house again. The same man. Older now, but still searching. I don't think he knows where I am. Not yet. But I know he hasn't stopped looking." I froze. The same man. The words immediately reminded me of the photograph from the newspaper. The blurry figure standing near the burning mill, watching everything, watching everyone. My father had spent decades searching for that man, and apparently Eleanor feared him until the end. I continued reading. "If anything happens to me, there is a key hidden inside the blue journal. You must never let them find it." The blue journal. My eyes widened. The blue journal. That was the same journal Eleanor had mentioned before disappearing. The same journal connected to the truth. I looked at Margaret immediately. "Where is it?" She stared at me. "The journal?" I nodded. "The blue one." For the first time since I arrived, Margaret looked genuinely nervous. "There is something I haven't shown you." My pulse quickened. Without another word, she stood and walked upstairs. A minute later, she returned carrying a small metal box. The box was locked, old, covered in dust. Margaret placed it on the table between us. Then she whispered 4 words that changed everything. "Eleanor left this for you." I stared at the box. My heart pounded in my chest. How is that possible? Margaret swallowed hard. Because according to every official record, Eleanor disappeared more than 30 years ago. Yet somehow, she knew my name. She knew I would come. And she had been waiting for me all along. Margaret handed me the key. My hands trembled as I unlocked the metal box. Inside was a faded blue journal. The same journal mentioned in Eleanor's letters. The same journal she had spent decades protecting. The first pages contained ordinary notes. But deeper inside, everything changed. Eleanor had documented meetings, names, dates, and conversations. According to her notes, several influential people in town had been secretly altering official records for years. Birth records, property ownership records, inheritance documents. Entire family histories had been rewritten. Then I found a name I recognized. My father's. At first, I felt betrayed. Had he been involved? Had he helped them? But as I continued reading, the truth became clearer. My father had discovered the fraud. He tried to expose it. That was when the threats began. That was when Eleanor became a target. Near the end of the journal, Eleanor wrote something that made my heart stop. The child must never know until the time is right. Beneath the sentence was a photograph. A baby. On the back was written a single word. Michael. I returned home carrying the journal. My mother was waiting. This time, she didn't deny anything. Instead, she told me the truth she had hidden for decades. Years ago, after the fire, Eleanor arrived at their doorstep carrying an infant. She was frightened, exhausted, desperate. She believed dangerous people were still searching for her. She begged my parents to protect the child, to raise him as their own. Then she disappeared. My mother began crying. The child was you. The room fell silent. Everything suddenly made sense. The strange photograph, the hidden letters, my father's guilt, the secret he carried all his life. He wasn't hiding a crime. He was protecting a promise made to a terrified mother. For more than 30 years, he had kept that promise. Even from me. Using clues from the journal, I followed Eleanor's trail. The search lasted weeks. Small towns, old records, retirement communities, dead ends. Then finally, I found her. She was living under another name in a quiet coastal town. Older now, her hair completely gray. But the moment she looked at me, I knew. She knew who I was immediately. Tears filled her eyes. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "Michael." The way she said my name felt different. Not like a stranger, not like a friend. Like a mother seeing her son after a lifetime apart. I sat beside her. For hours we talked. She told me everything. The fear, the fire, the years spent hiding, the sacrifices she made to keep me safe. And for the first time in my life, I finally understood why my father had written that letter. As the sun began to set over the ocean, Eleanor finally told me the part of the story no one else knew. For decades, I had believed my father was hiding a dark secret. In reality, he had been carrying a burden. A sacrifice. The night of the fire, Eleanor discovered evidence that several powerful men had been stealing land and altering legal records. If exposed, they would lose everything. They needed the evidence destroyed. The mill burned that same night. Eleanor escaped with only a few documents and her infant son. Me, my father helped her disappear. He created a new identity, found a safe place, and promised to protect her child no matter what happened. That promise changed his life forever. He could never tell the truth. Not to friends, not to family, not even to me. If he did, he risked exposing Eleanor's location, risked exposing the people who were still searching for her. For years he accepted being misunderstood. He accepted distance, silence, regret, because keeping the secret meant keeping us alive. I felt tears in my eyes. All those years I thought he was emotionally distant. All those years I believed he didn't know how to express love. Now I realize something different. Every sacrifice he made was an act of love. Every secret was protection. Every difficult choice was made for someone else. For me, Eleanor reached for my hand. Your father saved both of us. I looked toward the ocean. For the first time, I understood the man who raised me. Not the version I imagined. The real man. The imperfect man. The brave man. The man who carried an impossible responsibility for more than 30 years. And suddenly, I wished I could tell him that I finally understood. A week later, I visited my father's grave. The sky was clear. The air was still. In my hands, I carried 3 things. His letter, Eleanor's journal, and a photograph. The photograph showed all 3 of us together. My father, Eleanor, and me. A family connected by secrets, sacrifice, and love. I stood quietly for several minutes. Then I placed the photograph against the headstone. For years, I thought I knew my father's story. I was wrong. The truth was far more complicated. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. He carried guilt. He lived with regrets. But he also showed extraordinary courage. He protected people when it would have been easier to walk away. He kept promises that cost him decades of peace. And he loved more deeply than I ever realized. The wind moved gently through the trees. For a moment, it felt as though he was standing beside me, listening. I unfolded the letter one final time. The paper was worn now. the ink beginning to fade. Yet the final sentence remained clear. If one day you learn the truth, I hope you can forgive me. A tear rolled down my cheek. Then I smiled, because forgiveness was no longer necessary. There was nothing left to forgive. I finally understood. Carefully, I folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope. The secret that had survived 30 years was finally free. And so was I. As I walked away from the cemetery, I looked back one last time. The sunlight touched the stone. Varm, peaceful. For the first time since his death, I felt something unexpected. Not grief, not anger, not confusion. Peace. Some secrets destroy families. Others save them. This secret had done both. And that was the legacy my father left behind.